Going to give everyone a minute to sign on, and we'll get started in just a minute. All right, it looks like we have a number of people signed on, so we'll get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for attending today. I am Nicole Jarvis. I'm the Assistant Director of Programs at Cancer and Careers, and I will be the host for today's webinar. Really quickly, before we begin, I just want to go over a few things related to accreditation. Today's webinar is accredited for CEUs by ANCC, NASW, the New York State Education Department State Board for Social Work, the California Board of Registered Nursing, and the Society for Human Resource Management. If you plan on receiving credits, continuing education credit for this program from any of these accrediting bodies, please proceed with the following steps. First, you must log in individually. Participants who listen in on someone else's line will not receive credit. And then you must also complete and submit the evaluation and post-test, as well as receive a passing grade on the post-test. Following today's session, you will receive that email with all of this information. That email will be sent by 5 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, Thursday, February 3rd, and certificates will then be emailed between 4 to 6 weeks. Also, please note that the planners and presenters for this program have not disclosed any pertinent financial relationships or conflicts of interest, and no commercial support was provided for this program. Thanks in part to direct support from Genentech, HSN, and PBC, Cancer and Careers is able to offer this 8th year of the Balancing Work and Cancer webinar series. This program is created to provide patients and survivors, as well as their care teams and employers, with concise, targeted information around the work-related issues that arise after a cancer diagnosis. Additionally, we'd like to recognize Cancer and Careers year-round sponsors who support all of our core programs and allow us to continue providing all of our resources and services free of charge. So there are many components to looking for work. A resume remains an essential tool in the job search process. Whether you're changing careers, returning to work after time off, or simply looking to highlight specific skills and experience, your resume tells a story, your story. This is why it's so important to understand how to make it an effective document that will work for you and help you stand out from other job seekers. Today, we'll focus on how to best structure your resume to show your professional experience and accomplishments, explain how to format it to highlight your strengths, and then to provide techniques to better define and explain your abilities. If any of you have questions or anything is unanswered during the presentation, we're going to save some time for Q&A at the end of the hour. All questions that you want answered should be entered into the Q&A box, which is located on the top or the bottom of your screen. Please make sure not to ask your questions in the chat box, as we may not see them there. If you're joining us via the phone today, you can press *9, which will alert us all of your question. Now, to take us through this topic, I am thrilled to welcome back Julie Jansen. Julie is a speaker, trainer, coach, and author who's helped thousands of professionals find success and satisfaction at work, as well as finding work that's gratifying for them. Julie is one of the original coaches at CAC, volunteering with us for over a decade, helping patients and survivors with their individual employment challenges. Additionally, Julie is the coach who does our resume review service, which we hope you'll utilize after today's webinar. So as I mentioned, there will be time for you to ask questions after Julie's presentation, but for now, I'm going to hand it over to Julie to get us started. Julie?
Thanks, Nicole. I appreciate it. Happy Groundhog Day, everyone. And happy Chinese New Year and happy beginning of the Olympics. So there's lots going on. So today I'm digging into the topic of writing and rewriting or creating your resume. We all know managing the psychological aspects of a job search is really difficult, and oftentimes starting off with writing your resume is a big block that prevents you from doing anything else. Your resume definitely should be updated regularly so you're not faced with having to do a giant overhaul. However, unfortunately, most people forget to do this. I get a lot of calls. I'm a professional resume writer. I get a lot of calls from people saying they have a resume emergency. Oh, thank you. Thank you for that correction. Lunar New Year. Thank you. Happy Lunar New Year. Yeah, I appreciate that. And anyway, so today's webinar will dig into every element of writing your resume, and we will definitely have time for Q&A. The origin, just for some of you who are interested in a little history, the origin of the resume began in feudal England as a letter of introduction from a lord or head of a guild when a man traveled to another part of the kingdom. It evolved to being called a curriculum vitae, or CV, and that term means course of one's life, and finally became known as a resume, which is French for summary. Generally speaking, most Europeans still call the document a CV, but in the last handful of years, many Europeans and other parts of the world have started moving to the American resume format. So how do you think about your resume? On the next slide. Your resume is a marketing document that captures your history, of course, but even more important, it needs to highlight your achievements so that a prospective employer will think and believe that you can do the same things for them. Your resume definitely needs to sell you before you actually talk to the employer. So on the next slide, we talk about the fact that it's really, really, really difficult to remember everything you've done in your career. So some of the tools that you can use are job descriptions for the jobs you've held, if you can uncover those, your past performance reviews that actually highlight your achievements, because achievements are one thing that people really find challenging to write. It's also a good idea to read job postings online to pinpoint keywords and phrases. If you attended the job search webinar that we did last week, I talked a bit about ATS, and I'll do that again today. And those keywords and phrases are very, very important to incorporate into your resume. And then finally, this is one of my favorite tips of this entire webinar, is I recommend creating what I call a master resume, where you actually dump everything you have ever done so that you, into this document, you open up a Word document and you have your resume, you just dump things in there. You don't have to, edit it or do anything. And you can use that document to cut and paste onto the actual final resume that you're going to create for specific jobs. It's ideal, of course, to do this while you're working. Unfortunately, 90% of people do not do this and then need to scramble to remember everything when they actually do need a resume. So here are some basics about writing an effective resume. While you may spend hours and hours rewriting your resume, you definitely should not expect that anyone else will read each word with equal care. And in fact, it's almost certain that someone's going to skim through your resume in, 6 to 30 seconds, believe it or not. And the goal is to help that person make the decision to either read it again more thoroughly or put it in the yes pile for screening. And this is if you get past ATS scanning. So to keep your reader's interest, definitely avoid really long paragraphs, long sentences, large blocks of text, or even sometimes I see this, the opposite side, which is very little content. So other basics for writing your resume: don't use personal pronouns. Your resume is actually the only job search document that I can think of where first person tense or personal pronouns are not used. You certainly use those in a cover letter. If you choose to use that style on LinkedIn, you could even in bios, but for some reason the resume it's just kind of not used. So use really strong action verbs, avoid weak ones like helped and assisted and coordinated, involved. I mean, sometimes those are appropriate, but mostly there's going to be substitutes of stronger types of verbs to use. Typically, a resume is 2 pages, for most people, 1 page for someone who's entry level. And I'm just finishing up a resume for a C-level person who has a 3-page resume, and he's in a government type role, lots of publications and things. So I'm creating an addendum for him. He had a 6-page resume, and I was able to get it down to 3 pages with an addendum. Leave off or consolidate earlier jobs. You just don't need to list every single job you've had unless you're in your 20s or 30s or even 40s. That's great, but it's not necessary. And you can always speak to it in conversations or interviews. And remember that job titles don't necessarily always have universal meaning. There are industries that have kind of very specialized job titles. And so what I often recommend to clients is to put, if it's a kind of a funky job title, put in parentheses the job title that is more commonly used. And you can find that by, as I mentioned earlier, perusing job postings. So other elements of an effective resume that are really important. Every resume should have a profile or a summary. That is a relatively brief paragraph where the reader will get almost all relevant information about you as a candidate, and just by reading that particular section, and will decide about whether to consider you further by reading only the summary or profile, which they almost always do after they look at your name. Many hiring professionals will tell you that that's all they read. They might flip to look at your education or some of the places you've worked, the employers. But the profile is also a nice place to add some of your personal / professional traits that have made you successful and help you to stand out. Keywords ad nauseum, definitely you want to have keywords on your resume. So what I tend to do, and those are typically more technical in nature, like, you wouldn't put team player or effective on teams in that section. And those are the things that are scanned. And I usually do a bulleted keywords section on people's resumes. And at a minimum, your resume the content on your resume should be achievement statements versus responsibilities. So typically the style is that you'd have a brief paragraph describing your job underneath your title, and then bulleted achievements. People so often make the mistake of listing their tasks and responsibilities and not focusing on achievements. And as I mentioned a few moments ago, a potential employer is more interested in how you're going to help them make a difference and meet their goals. So don't speak in generalities. Emphasize, if you can, emphasize your achievements and your accomplishments by using quantifiable and measurable information. So an example is the person who reduced turnover by 25% in 6 months is more impressive than the one who merely reduced turnover. So other things to think about when you're writing your resume. Avoid detail-oriented. If you're working in data analysis, I certainly hope you're detail-oriented, and you don't need to say that, although I could see why you would want to, because you feel like that's an important trait to possess, but it's also assumed. A one-line headline is a great idea. You can switch that out and put whatever you want every time you would apply for a new job. So that headline is similar to what you see on LinkedIn. Right near your name and your photo. It's specific and focused, and also be sure to always, sometimes I see people, more often than not, I see people put their education and their certifications before their work experience, especially if they have advanced degrees. And if your degree is recent and you just earned your degree like in 2021, that's okay. But generally it's listed after your work experience. And this is important for those of you who have left the workforce for a while because you were going through treatment, or you just needed a break, or you were laid off, or whatever it is. If you've done any volunteer or community service, it's highly recommended that you put it on there, but not just listing the organization, but just as you would for work experience, adding achievements. So what did you do? Whether you raised money, or you recruited more members, or you developed new materials, or whatever it is that's relevant to that particular volunteer work. And then finally, add professional memberships on your resume. If you're not a member of something anymore, it's still okay to put the membership and just put, I'm making this up, 2017 to 2021. It still shows that you were a professional, a member of a professional or trade association. So next, a resume does need to be visually appealing, and what that looks like is just plenty of white space and a readable font. These are, if you're looking at these slides, the fonts that I prefer are the ones listed here. I've kind of been switching a little bit more to Cambria, and I'm getting a little fond of Helvetica because I'm tired of the other ones. But you know, Arial and Times New Roman and some of those other ones are not really used that much anymore. People are not putting their entire addresses on resumes, primarily because of privacy and identity theft. And I'm really surprised by how many resumes I see in the resume review service where people are listing their references on their resume. So they're putting people's names and phone numbers and email addresses on their resume. And I'm sure those people wouldn't want the world to see that information. So those should be listed on a separate document. So now we're going to kind of dig into more of the how to do some of these things that are a little bit more complex. So this is actually a very robust list of action verbs. And I'll tell you, I'm a professional resume writer and I refer to this list all the time. I have similar lists and I'm always looking at them because I don't want to continually use, and you know, it's so easy to fall into that, using the same words over and over and over again. So if you can shake it up, or if you have I have a little electronic synonym finder of thesaurus. I like to use that as well. But this just is a good reference list for you if you're trying to figure out how to say something and you're starting almost all of your achievements and accomplishments with these action verbs. So, and then let's dig into how do you write accomplishments? So some of the questions that you can ask yourself and this is such a difficult exercise for many people, resume writers tend to use formulas for this part, for writing accomplishments for people. So there's the most simple one is PAR, P-A-R. It stands for Problem, Action, Result. And if you're looking at this slide, some of the questions you can ask is, did you do something, achieve something with few or less resources? Did you get any special recognition or awards, and for what? Did you solve problems? Did you increase efficiency? Did you achieve something that had never been done in your company before? And did you develop, create, design, or invent something? And then the next slide shows just more questions that you can ask, like, and it's always important, even if you've supervised just an intern, it's great to show that you've got that experience. So how many, what did they do? You know, did you save the company money? Have you been promoted? I mean, often I get this question of, well, I had 4 titles at my company, and they end up smushing the titles all together on the top of the experience. And I always say, move it, you know, separate them out with the years that you worked in them, because it shows progression and it doesn't show. And then you can put a little description under each title. Mushing them all together just de-emphasizes the fact that your company kept tapping you on the shoulder and promoting you or moving you into new responsibilities. And then some of these other things is just like, how did you make a difference? So now we're going to kind of look at the components of an accomplishment in an actual example on the next slide. So here, this is an administrative professional. And so the existing problem for this person as an administrative support for 2 directors, this person was asked to manage the expense approval process. So you'd be like, yeah, what's the big deal? But it was 15 employees. He or she saw that there were 3 forms that had to be filled out every time. So needless to say, the employees, most of them procrastinated. 1 was on one system, and then 2 were on older legacy systems that were going to be phased out. And so because it was so inconvenient and tedious for the employees, they were really late in submitting their expenses. Even though they were supposed to, submit them within 30 days, often they didn't. And this person spent so much time chasing people. And then the process itself of, the administrative professional who's writing this achievement took hours. So that was the problem or the need or the situation. On the next slide, it digs into what he or she did about it. So he or she consolidated all the forms by creating one form with all the necessary information, presented it to their managers, and obviously suggested that it stay on the newer system because the legacy system was going to be shut down. The barrier for this person was that one director really could have cared less how long it took for the expenses, or the fact that people didn't turn them in, just wasn't interested. He didn't see the benefit. The other manager was into it and complimentary. And so this person asked that manager to kind of sell it to her peer. And so that's what she was able to do. And then moving to the next slide, this is the actual achievement statement. So 8 months, and it's a tad bit long. I mean, I can think of ways that I would shorten it, but I made it a little longer just so you could appreciate the process. 8 months after implementing the new form, 100% of employees were submitting their expenses on time. And it's not, you're not going to use first person tense, but this gave me the time to focus on other responsibilities. The employees appreciated the newer process, and they were no longer getting nagging emails from finance. And then the next slide, I'm sorry, that's the results. And then this is the bullet. Apologies, that was the results. So that's why it was in first person tense. The next slide is the bullet, this bullet here. Redesign monthly expense submissions for 2 departments, so 13 employees, by streamlining the process into online form. She could have just said streamlining process. This resulted in improved employee productivity. That's her and everybody else, and accelerated the payment cycle from 90 plus days to 30 days. So that's a nice achievement. And if he or she hadn't sat, I mean, that's not a real person. I actually made all this up, but if he hadn't sat and thought about it and broke it down. Is it broke? Yeah, into sections like that, she would never have been able to come up with this bullet. And so this is really important. And people will often say, oh, I just do my job. But you'd be amazed at how much of a difference you make, and how much of that information you can take and turn into actual quantified achievements on your resume. So now we're going to just jump briefly into abilities. Abilities are important, less for your resume and more so that you can talk about them in interviews and in your cover letters and while networking. So companies are interested in your abilities. So if you look at the accomplishment statement, like the accomplishment statement that we just went through, some of the abilities that person has is organization. She has some technical abilities. She has persuasion abilities. She's able to implement a process, manage a project rather, all of those things. And so those would be some of the abilities that she would think about if she was on an interview. And you will use, like I said, you'll use this information in a lot of different ways, even just introducing yourself. Some of my strongest abilities are X. So that's why I touch on abilities, even though you're not really putting them, you might put them in the bulleted keywords, or you might put something in a summary, but generally they're not a huge part of your actual resume. So last week, I know some of you are here that attended the webinar last week, and so some of this may sound familiar, but ATS, and it seems that people kind of know what ATS is, applicant tracking systems, on the next slide, and just flip to the next slide if you don't mind. Yeah, thanks, Scott. And so ATS is software that is used to collect, to scan, to sort, and rank. So it does all those 4 things: collects, scans, sorts, and ranks job applications, which include resumes and cover letters. So it's scanning the application, it's scanning the resume, and it's scanning your cover letter, which is why I always say, yes, please write a cover letter. And then what happens is companies, so ATS eliminates the least qualified candidates versus identifying the best qualified candidates using resume filtering bots. So if you're not meeting their resume filtering bot algorithms, that's when you're knocked out. It's not including the 5 to 8, most qualified people. More about ATS on the next slide. Many companies, in fact, I'm going to put myself out there and say, not tiny companies, not startups, but most companies, 95% of large companies, probably 100 use ATS, and at least 65, it's probably higher, medium-sized companies use ATS. And part of the challenge with ATS, well, there's a lot of challenges, but one of them is that there's not just like 3 ATS systems out there. There's software. There's some companies buy software and then they have it customized. Some companies develop their own. Some companies use makeshift ATS that isn't even intended for ATS, some sort of database. So you just don't know how your resume is going to be scanned because you don't know what type of ATS. So there's some real strict rules of thumb regarding ATS and what you need to do. And just for some stats here, on average, and I said corporate, but let's just say a job posting receives 250 to 350 applications. And this number is really increasing. And typically companies just screen 8 to 10 people. So the numbers are not on your side. And that's why ATS is so important. So looking at more information about ATS on the next slide, the best type of file to use is a doc or docx. PDF is great because what PDF does is it preserves the design and format of your resume, yet it's not compatible with all ATS. So it could be a little bit of a risk to save it as a PDF. So, and sometimes applications will request the format, and then that makes your life easy so you don't have to guess. Don't put your contact information, we talked about not using addresses anyway, but don't put your contact information ever in the header or footer. It's fine to put your name, that's okay, but not contact information, because not all ATS can read and parse information that's stored in the header or footer sections of a Word document. And again, optimize your resume with the keywords that are the same as in a job posting. And there's an art to kind of weaving it in on your resume in different places on your resume, not just on the top. So we have about 3 more slides regarding ATS. So keywords represent, in this case, hard and soft skills. So while you might have a bulleted keyword section that's more technical, as I mentioned earlier, you definitely will have some soft skills woven throughout your resume, because most job postings will list the, I'm making this up, the 6 requirements of the job. And then the applicant must have this, and then they usually talk about their values, their corporate values, or the qualities that they want people to have. So it's nice to weave those in on your resume as well. Find 3 to 5 job descriptions for jobs that interest you. I have every client whose resume I write, I ask them to send me job postings links so that I can see what the keywords are. And part of my responsibility, and they hire me to do this, is to weave those in throughout the resume from those specific job postings. And then one thing you can do is there's a couple of these out there. I don't know what they all are, but they're called word cloud generators. And the one that I'm most familiar with is Wordle. And what you can do is you can cut and paste job descriptions into Wordle, and it will identify the words that are used most frequently for you so that you can then weave those in. So more about ATS. We're kind of wrapping it up on that, but you want to, I mentioned where you place keywords. So using the most important keywords 2 to 3 times is what I recommend on your resume. So just because you list a keyword once, that doesn't, it's much more effective if you have it up in the summary or in the bulleted keyword section, and then you have it like somewhere in your a couple of your descriptions, and maybe towards the end of your resume if you have that experience. Adding the bulleted keywords thing, I call it core competencies or areas of expertise, or you could call it skills, it doesn't matter. But it's also not a nice visual, not just for ATS, but for someone who's reading your resume to look and say, oh, Nicole has this, this, and this, and because it's right there underneath your summary, that section. So it's good for that, useful for that purpose as well. Okay, and then on the next slide, always spell out words. And that's the thing is some companies will just use, like this is an example, search engine optimization. Some companies will just say SEO on in their job posting. And so that's why the proper way in writing a resume is to spell it out and then put the abbreviation that's more commonly used in parentheses right after that. And then you can use the abbreviation throughout your resume. So that's always recommended. You never want charts or graphics or images on your resume, because they're really very confusing to ATS. And I often see those formats that people pull off online that they're very attractive usually, with colors, and they're usually 2 columns. Columns aren't great either. So you always want just a linear version of your resume. I did a resume for someone recently, last week actually, who works in the music industry. She's rather creative, and she had one of those kind of really attractive formats with lots of colors. And I said to her, just keep that for handing to people if you ever not handing, but emailing to people if you want. But if you're going to apply online for anything, use the version that I did for you. And then you stick to simple bullets. Lately, I've been seeing a lot of people use those weird arrows that used to be popular years ago. And you can, there's top resume, job scan, skill roads, and there's some others where you can get a free resume review, but be aware that many of them are interested in having you pay them to write their resume. So just be careful of that, whatever service it is you use, just to see what their feedback is, and take feedback with a grain of salt. So that's ATS, a lot about ATS. Cover letters I've already mentioned. You always write one. It doesn't need to be long. I have a client who writes the longest cover letters, and he always sends them to me to review. And mostly all I end up doing is cutting it down. It's really kind of, they're often written for someone you don't know. So you kind of almost want to think of them as customized direct mail. I mean, some industries still use direct mail. And again, reminder, they're scanned just like your resume is. And so open with something interesting if possible. It could be, the interesting thing could be the second bullet, which is something notable about the company that you have researched, that's not just something that's really obvious. That could be something interesting, or it could be something, your reaction or response to the specific job opening and why you're thrilled about it, excited about it, or whatever, And I do write cover letters that just say I'm applying, for the blah, blah, blah position. My resume is attached, and that's okay. It's not terrible if you do that. Don't waste the reader's time. So keep it brief. So I'm a fan of an intro paragraph, 3 bullets that say, this is why I believe that the job opening is aligned with my experience. Bullet 1, bullet 2, bullet 3, and those bullets have content in them that reflect what they've talked about in the job posting that's important, as it relates to your experience. Keep it brief, and proofread your letter. Everybody makes mistakes. So just try to proof it. And then if you're doing an email, Be thoughtful about your subject line. That's one of the hardest things for people to think about. You know, the best subject line in the world that you could have would be Julie Jansen referred me to you. But you know, we don't, oftentimes we're applying for something and we aren't fortunate enough to get a referral. So you kind of have to think about what you want your email subject line to say, putting your contact information on the top of your letter, and also put your when you're in a job search, put your contact information in your signature file in your email. I don't know why most people don't do that, but it's really helpful. And I'm constantly asking clients who are looking for a job, like, what's your cell? What's your, you know, I know what their email is because they email me, what's this, what's that, you know, and it just is so much easier. And then if you can find a person to follow up with, that's great. Regardless, what you want to do is after you've, you know, applied for something, you want to find people on LinkedIn, which will now segue to LinkedIn, one of my favorite topics. So how is LinkedIn different from a resume? Well, I think that's still an option to upload your resume on LinkedIn, but nobody really does it. And you kind of like want that to be a separate step. So you really just want people to be reviewing your profile briefly. Nobody really reads them that extensively. They're primarily for scanning. But as I mentioned last week, if you attended that webinar, I think it's like 720 million people are on LinkedIn. And so you know how it's the first connections, second connections, third connections. And it's just so easy to keep up with people on LinkedIn and see what they're doing and sending them quick messages. And 96% of hiring managers use LinkedIn to source candidates. Your profile is public, your resume is not. So, and you can always tailor and customize your resume. LinkedIn, you can change the content on LinkedIn, but it's pretty, static. I mean, it's unless you're posting all the time or unless you're putting media things on there, it's just kind of what it is. But it's really, really, really great for networking and research. And so many of my clients say that they've gotten outreach through LinkedIn after they've optimized their profile. So a little bit more about LinkedIn. On the next slide, your professional headline is a great place to market your brand or value proposition. So most people default, if they're working, they default to the title that they have at the company, and that's fine. You could have your title and then you could say other things too, you know, because you've got 120 characters that you can use there. The about section is similar to the summary that's on your resume. I often will use the summary on someone's resume that I wrote. I'll use it on LinkedIn and just break it up a little bit, so it's not just one big paragraph. And in the about section, I'll also put specialties, another opportunity for keywords, and I'll bullet, like, you know, no more than 5 or 6 specialties that are keywords in the about section. So the about section, if someone were to really read your profile, that's going to be one of the sections similar to your resume that they're going to pay more attention to more carefully. The skills and endorsement section is really, really important because that's where you have the opportunity to populate with 50 skills, and I'm having trouble talking today, 50 skills in there, and they could be phrases. They can be just one word, but what you want to do is if you go to the skills and endorsement section and say you start typing in I'm a PHOTO, and down will drop photoshopping or, you know, photography, and you'll see the ones that are most commonly scanned. And that's a really good guide for you to figure out what the appropriate keywords are. And I'll often see, and I write LinkedIn profiles, I'll often see people say things in different ways. So strategic management and then management, you know, or whatever. So, because again, to my earlier point, companies use different language. They don't all use exactly the same universal language when they're describing things in job postings. And so, the recommendations are great because they are the thing that can be fresh, and you don't want recommendations I mean, I've been on LinkedIn since 2013. I think I probably have recommendations from them, but people really don't go that far back to read them. So I like to always have current recommendations, have a couple for every year or so, if you can do that. And then definitely offer to recommend other people as well. And then finally about LinkedIn, when you get updates from LinkedIn, if you've got it set that way and you want to constantly be looking at your settings, you definitely want to reach out, even if you just do the like thing, which this morning I spent a little time on LinkedIn and liked about 5 posts of people I know, just so they could see, because my name will pop up and it'll kind of put me first and foremost in their mind for a few moments. You can customize your LinkedIn public profile. When you first become a member, they just assign you the string of letters and numbers, and you can usually find your name unless you have a really, really common name, and then you can do things like put a dash in between. But I like to customize it for people, and then definitely review job openings that are posted. So one time I'm self-employed and have been forever, but I signed up for career coach, executive coach, and a couple other things in the Let Recruiters Know You're Open. And I get job postings every day. And I see what, like, schools and government agencies and who, nonprofits who are looking for coaches. And I just find it, I'm not looking for a job, but I find it very interesting. And it just gives me a great idea of, kind of what's going on in my industry. And then spend 20 minutes. This is, whenever I say this to people, they say, well, what am I doing for 20 minutes on LinkedIn? So you're doing a number of things. You're doing research on people, and you're doing research on companies. So say you've applied for a job and now you want to find a couple people and say, hey, I applied for this job. I'd like to reach out to you and perhaps talk to you if I can. So you're doing that. You're looking for companies to target that are of interest to you, whether they're in an industry that's interesting to you or a company that you think would be great to work for. You're inviting people to connect with you, always using personalized invitations. Never the default. There's stats that show that people won't accept just the default invitation as readily as they will if there's one that was customized for them. You could even be participating in group discussions. You're certainly reviewing jobs. There's a lot of content on LinkedIn for you to learn. You can follow companies and you can follow people and you can look at them. And so there's a lot that you can do on LinkedIn. And you don't need to make it onerous. Just like I said, 20 minutes, a half an hour, and you can really get a lot out of that kind of activity if you're in a job search. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie. I know this really provides a really great foundation from which to start crafting resumes that will be effective. We do have a number of questions, as I knew there would be for this session, but really quickly before we head into the Q&A, here are a few of Cancer and Careers resources that may be helpful for everyone who is job searching or considering job searching in the near future. We offer free career coaching on our website through our Ask a Career message board, our Career Coach message board. And this is where a roster of career coaches will answer any questions you may have and allow you to get personalized feedback that really suits your needs and your specific situation. Excuse me. We also have the resume review service, which I mentioned. Hopefully what will happen today is that you'll all take the information that Julie provided to you all and implement it, and then you can send it over to her to see if there's anything that you missed or any ways to kind of improve upon what the changes you made. We have a number of webinars left, and we also have free publications, including our job search toolkit, which is really helpful as you're navigating the job search process. If you want to just skip to the next slide, please. I also just want to point out the free events that we have coming up. As we've mentioned in a lot of our outreach, we are hosting a job search suite of sorts. So we have 2 more webinars that are focused on the aspects of the job search, including networking and career change. Also, we have our virtual Midwest conference coming up on Friday, March 25th. Registration is open and free, so we'd love for you all to join us if you are available. And I want to go to the next slide. I'm just going to leave up the CEU requirements while we make our way through the Q&A, and we will get started now. So this first question is from Jennifer. She said, I'm writing my first remote resume based off a job that I found. Can I upload both the job description and the resume to the CAC site? I guess, that's both a question for me and you. Do you feel that you need the job description in order to provide the resume review service critiques that you provide, Julie?
I don't know. I mean, it can't hurt. Most people don't do that, but I think it would be fine, especially if, Jennifer, your resume is not at all geared towards if it's a career change kind of situation or something, that might be helpful for me. And I would be delighted to, open it up and review it as well.
Yeah, I certainly imagine that the more detail you can give in terms of what you're looking for, especially if it's a career change, so that you can kind of reformat and highlight specific things might be helpful. I don't know if there's a character limit on how much you can upload on our website. That's something I can look into, but there's a section where you can give a little bit more detail and background. So
the application process, if you just explain it, like you said, in greater detail, that'd be great.
Exactly. All right, this next question is from Nicolette. This came in a little bit early in the presentation. What would a useful headline contain?
Well, normally it would be really like a title. That's the most straightforward headline to use. And sometimes what I see people do is that because they've got a lot of like project management, product development, I'm trying to think of something else, technology implementation, and those are three very primary aspects of their job, then they might put that instead of a title.
This next question is from Alicia. Can one use the first person in the profile or summary section?
No, not on a resume, no. And I don't know why that is, by the way, but nobody does it. It's just universally known that you don't put first person tense on a resume. I can't tell you.
Which is funny because you're typically not using third person ever in your life. So this was
right, exactly.
one place to do it.
I know, it's odd.
As you're trying to introduce who you are.
Well, you know what it reminds me of is when I get, particularly I get resumes from overseas. There aren't people that live in the States, and they usually have their photo. And I always joke and say, you don't put your photo on a resume in the United States. I know it's crazy because we have our photo all over social media, but it stems from early discrimination laws, where companies didn't want to discriminate, so they didn't put photos on. They didn't want photos on resumes, So it's kind of like left over from that. So some of this stuff is just left over.
And of course, the irony is that you need a photo on LinkedIn.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It's all over social media. You can easily look up someone. Yeah.
All right. This next question is from Kiasha. I hope I pronounced that right. Because of ageism, is it best not to add the year of positions held or the year you graduated college, etc.?
Yeah, so I think it's a red flag to not put years that you worked, because that's just glaringly like, why doesn't this person have the years? Remember that I mentioned earlier that you can leave off earlier jobs. So if you started working in, whenever, 1992, and you don't want someone to see that, then just leave off a few of the earlier jobs. As far as education, there's not a right or wrong with education. People can put their dates on or not. I tend to see most people over a certain age, like 45, leave it off.
Okay. This next question is from an anonymous attendee. How would you address gaps in your resume, and do you mention a cancer diagnosis at all? So I'll let you start this one, and I'll I'll follow up.
Okay, yeah. Although I might be equipped to answer the second part at this point, but I'd rather have you do it, Nicole. So the gaps, you don't address gaps on your resume. Now I have seen a couple resumes recently where their gaps were so large, meaning like one was like 15 or 18 years. And so that person did put caregiver for various family members. And I actually thought that was a great idea. If you're talking about a gap of a year or 2 or 3 or even 4, you don't put anything. You just make sure if you can, any projects you've worked on, any freelance work you've done, any volunteer work, that you really beef up those sections as well, but you definitely don't say anything about gaps.
Mm-hmm.
And then Nicole, you want to take the next question?
Yeah, and in terms of disclosing your cancer diagnosis, we have a lot of information about that on our website, just the topic of disclosure in general. When you are job searching though, we tend to encourage people to give it a little further thought. Of course, at the end of the day, it's always a personal decision, and however you feel about sharing is totally up to you. But ultimately, the resume and even the cover letter aren't really the best places to do that, just because ultimately you want to sell yourself as an employee and a professional first. So if you do feel like disclosing is something that you would like to do, we generally recommend that you wait until you've kind of gone through some of the hiring process, so people have an opportunity to kind of get to know you, understand your experience, understand your skill set, and then that's something that you can share a little bit later on. But in terms of the resume, we really recommend that you don't do that, just because, as Julie mentioned, I think she said the average time to look at a resume is 6 to 30 seconds. And so is that really what you want to use that very, very limited time to share? So it's just something that you want to make sure you're considering all of the different various interpretations of the information that you're sharing.
You may have said this, Nicole, in the cover letter as well.
Yeah, same. Yeah, exactly. And we've heard from a lot of people that like to that say they want to disclose as like an explanation, let's say for their resume gap or something like that. But again, you really just want to focus on your potential and what you have to offer them versus any more personal information right off the bat. Again, you could definitely share that later on.
And I've heard Nicole say this, and it always resonates for me, is people don't put, oh, I had diabetes and so, or I had a heart attack, or whatever.
Yeah, I went through a terrible divorce.
Yeah, I went through a terrible divorce. Nobody shares any of that. It's not that you don't want to, you want to be authentic, but it just isn't relevant in that stage of the process.
Exactly. Yeah, we like to say that, we like to remind everybody that omitting is not lying. There's a lot of information we don't share with our employers because frankly, it's none of their business. And if it is something that someone feels is necessary for their employer to know, again, you want to wait until they've had the opportunity to get to know you just a little bit more. Okay, we have a couple more questions to go. Eva asked, an application online asked for my GPA under education and I couldn't remember, so I left it blank. Is that bad? It was a long time ago.
I don't think it is. I mean, I would be embarrassed to put my GPA on an application. I was a terrible student. But I think there's a school of thought that if you don't put all required information, that gets discounted. But I think that's more of an algorithm thing. So I think the GPA of anything, I doubt it really matters if you left that blank.
Yeah,
I mean, if you wanted to, just guess, and who cares? It's not like they're going to call your former university and check and see what it is,
Right, and I mean, that's it. If it's hinging on your GPA, that seems a little bit odd as well.
Yeah, it's a little crazy.
This next question is, again, I will try my best to pronounce names correctly, but please forgive me if I don't. Shangrong. Shangrong asks, all my volunteer work is breast cancer focused. How do I address that on my resume? You just put the volunteer work on. I mean, I think I was saying
in maybe the webinar last week or to someone, I said, I've been volunteering for Cancer and Careers for years and years. And really barely anyone has ever asked me why, or if I have cancer,
Right.
So it's like, that's the volunteer work you do.
And they're not allowed to ask you if you have
cancer. Yeah. And they're not allowed to ask you. Exactly. Yeah.
Just something to keep in mind too. And if the topic if you get a little bit more into the volunteer work, if it is something that maybe you've done a lot of, and that's something that's padding your resume a little bit, you can say, it's a cause that I hold dear, or something like that, very vague and just kind of keeping it general. Alicia asks, would a robust volunteer position 10 to 20 hours a week go under work experience?
I'm kind of like scrupulous about this. It's sort of like, if you didn't get paid, I'm not comfortable putting it under work experience. I sort of like, I don't know, that's my sort of the way I feel about it. Mm-hmm. But you could put it under there and then just say volunteer if you're doing it because it's more current and because you want it to be on the first page of your resume. You could put it under there and then put volunteer, 10 to 20 hours a week or something if you wanted. And then that way you're not saying you got paid for it.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess if you put it under volunteer work, you can also say whatever achievements you did, if they sound in line with whatever position you're applying for.
Yeah.
So you really showed results and helped move a company forward, even though it was a volunteer role, you can just describe it under there and it would still count.
And remember, I mean, nonprofits rely heavily on volunteers. I mean, they couldn't exist without many of them. They could not exist without volunteers. So, it's something to be proud of too. Just
certainly, it's an important role to play, even if it's not paid.
Right.
This is another question from an anonymous attendee. Is it appropriate to limit your experience to just the past 10 years? I
kind of like the 15-year mark. I feel like that's good, normal, but sometimes what I hear though is, oh, but the best job I ever had was my first job after graduating from college, or my second job, and I want that company to be on there. Then put it on. That's great. Just do what makes sense for you. It's just that if you've had a lot of different jobs, you don't want to be listing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have time for a couple more questions. This one's from Lindsay. If I worked for a company until 2011 and then have been freelancing for them ever since, how do I delineate that on my resume?
So you just put if you have an LLC name or doing business as name, or just put consultant or freelance consultant, and then you're going to do the same thing that you would do if you were an employee when you were an employee in 2011, which is listing a description of the work you do for clients and then bulleted achievements. Same exact format. It's just that you're freelancing.
Okay. This question is from Annie. Should you have the same information on your resume as you do on LinkedIn, or is LinkedIn more about job description versus achievements?
Yeah, I don't recommend putting achievements on LinkedIn. And one reason is that, well, it's too much information, A. B, it's often talking about, things that are confidential or whatever with the company, like budget numbers or percentages and things like that. And I don't think that's the place to put that. So I think you just put a little brief description. And then the more important sections on LinkedIn, as I mentioned, are the skills and endorsement section, the about section, the headline, and of course your education.
This is actually another question regarding LinkedIn. This one's from Chris. Many managers and people from our corporate office are on LinkedIn. So how would I go about looking for a new job using LinkedIn without them finding out?
Yeah, you don't need to worry about that. I mean, first of all, they're unlikely that they're sitting and looking at your LinkedIn profile every day and comparing and contrasting of what changes you might have made or updates. The only place where, unless you put that noose around your neck that says open to work, which I don't recommend, you fill out the little, open to recruiters section that cannot be accessed by your employers. And so It's just something that you just don't need to be concerned with, and you can also just choose to be a little bit more vigilant about your privacy settings and just decide. But I would say that if you're looking for a job, you need to be careful about that too.
Right, because you could limit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, I see one more question. And again, if we don't get to your questions today, please feel free to send them to cancerandcareers@cew.org. This last question is from Dan. I'm a little shy about applying to jobs that have descriptions that I don't fit into. Instead of just focusing on what I do fit into, how do I decide on what positions to apply for?
Well, it probably isn't the most productive strategy to be applying for jobs that you're not a fit for, because if they use ATS, you're not going to go into the sort of, like I jokingly call the yes pile. If it's something you're really interested in and it's like a career change thing and you feel like you have the transferable skills, then you definitely want to try to find people who work at the company who might be able to have informational conversations with you. But you will just feel defeated if you just keep applying for jobs where you don't have the skills or experience online. I'm not suggesting, there's other ways to apply for jobs.
So if someone is looking for a career change, would they not just go through whatever the job description is and try to tailor their resume?
Yes, they would try to do that. I was under the impression that he was saying that he doesn't have any of the skills or experience. And I think it's not that black and white. So it kind of depends on how many of the skills you have, or,
right.
And usually when people make career changes, by the time they're doing it, even if they're just only had a few jobs, they definitely have, to your point, Nicole, transferable skills that they can pull out from the job posting and put on their resume, but it may not be enough to meet the algorithm requirements. So.
Okay. Well, we will be discussing career change in April. So for those of you who are interested in that and maybe need a little bit more guidance on how to sort of resell yourself in a new light, definitely join us. In the interest of time and want to be respectful of everyone's day, I think we are going to end here. I really hope that you all found this webinar valuable, and we really appreciate feedback. So again, we'll be circulating that online evaluation form by tomorrow. So if you would take the time to fill it out, even if you're not looking for CEUs, this really helps us to not only develop this program to meet your needs, but also continue receiving funding in order to keep these programs free of charge. As I mentioned, if we weren't able to get to your question, please send us an email at cancerandcareers@cew.org, and we'll be sure to either answer that for you or get an answer from Julie. Thank you again all for joining us today. And again, a big thank you to Julie. I look forward to next month when we will be discussing networking. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will see you soon, Julie.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.